Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on getting hired and breaking into the game industry as a digital artist. We're going to cover putting together a strong portfolio, preparing for interviews, positioning yourself for success as a freelance artist, or while working at a game studio in-house. But first things first, today's webinar is hosted by our team at Mudstack. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Mudstack. Mudstack is an artist-first tool for digital asset management, collaboration and review, version control, custom built by game studios for digital art teams. Artists can use Mudstack to store, organize, access, and view their 3D assets with our integrated 3D file viewer, see normals, shaders, UVs, and mesh, revert to previous versions, and capture feedback and updates. Our team leads can provide feedback and reviews, assign changes, and approve once final, see what assets still need work, and get everything through their art production pipeline. So Mudstack is now free for artists. So for all the artists listening, we'd love it if after this webinar you signed up for Mudstack today for free at mudstack.com and joined our Discord, where you can talk with our product team about how Mudstack can better help you with your art production pipeline. So we built Mudstack as an artist-first tool, and we regularly make content like this webinar to help artists succeed in the game industry. Also, we have a podcast called Clear as Mud, where we talk to artists and game developers in the industry about their careers, challenges they've faced along the way, and a lot more. So today we're joined by Matt Wright, the environment art director at Bad Robot Games, and Jonathan Lloyd, the founder and CEO of CG Hero. So thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So Matt was a guest on our Clear as Mud podcast, and he's a very talented artist and game industry veteran with over 20 years of experience in film and game development. He's worked on 11 feature films and shipped 13 PC console AAA titles. He's also an experienced lighting artist, mechanical and hard surface modeler, and mentor to junior 3D artists. So Jonathan is an accomplished entrepreneur with a decade-long mission to help CG artists market and sell their work globally. So in 2016, he founded CG Hero, which is a company that connects talented CG artists and studios with customers needing custom computer graphics. His dedication lies in connecting game studios with artists in order to achieve a more diverse and inclusive industry. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you guys both agreeing to do this. I think that you guys are going to have a lot to share that's going to be really useful for our listeners. And then so for everybody listening, we really encourage you guys to participate in this webinar. So there's a little Q&A at the bottom. Go ahead and just leave your questions as they come up throughout the webinar, and we'll try and make some space at the end to get to as many of them as possible. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So my first question is going to be for Matt. So we want to start kind of at the high level with you, Matt. So what are some of the key qualities you look for in an artist when considering them for a role in the game industry? So this applies to artists of any kind, so not specific necessarily to environment artists, but just any kind of artist that you've been involved in the hiring process for a long time. So
yeah, sure. So there's obviously there's a bunch of key stuff, right? Everyone focuses really heavily on a portfolio, and I think that is key, right? We're hiring somebody because they can apparently do a job. You've got to show us that you can do that job, right? So the portfolio is so key. And it doesn't have to be big. You can have one or two amazing pieces of work in that portfolio. I would much rather see that than see 6, 10, 15 pieces of work, and some of it's from 15 years ago or something. So don't show that. There's no need to show that. We all remember what our work looked like 15 years ago, and it was good for the time. But one of the cool things about this industry is it just progresses so much. So that old stuff, you can keep it in a locked safe somewhere, and if somebody wants to look at it, then you can show it to them. But so the portfolio is key. Have it focus on what you really enjoy doing, because that's going to be key, right? You're going to be spending quite a few hours making games. Make sure you're doing something that you enjoy, not just doing something that you think people will hire you for. So if you love lighting, focus your portfolio on lighting and focus your work on lighting. And I think after that, like, just be genuine, right? Like, write a nice cover letter, write that's kind of tailored to the company, do some research on the company that you're looking at, and just be honest about why you want to work there. So, you know, that's really two things that I look for. And then if you get through to a phone screen, that's normally like the next stage. Like, just be relaxed, have a nice conversation with the person that's interviewing you, and just, you know, talk about the industry, talk about why you love working in games, right? Like, there's so much to enjoy in the games industry, and there's so many reasons that we get into the games industry. Like, you know, tell your story a little bit, right? Like, build a bit of a narrative around how you got into games and why you're here.
Absolutely. I think like one of the things that you really talked about a lot in the podcast too that made a lot of sense to me was the need for honesty and asking, you know, questions if you don't know something, you know, and
Yes.
just yeah, that you've had some experiences in the past before where, like, you know, people get caught in an act of dishonesty and it sort of like shoots the interview in the foot, you know.
Let's never do that. And on both sides too, right? Like, honesty comes from both sides. And, you know, from if I ask you if you know about PBR shaders, and if you don't, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, we don't all know everything, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with saying no. It's very good. And just say, hey, it's something that I'd love to learn and pick up. That's great. But yeah, don't lie. Like, it's so obvious, and it's really amazing how many people do it. And it can even be a small little white lie about something that you did. Maybe somebody asks you about, like, hey, there's a scene from a game, what pieces in this game did you do? And you might say, hey, I did all of this, and that included this one object that maybe you didn't do, but you're not going to get into that detail. And then the recruiter asks you about that one thing that you didn't do, and now it starts spiraling. It's like, do you back up and say, oh, well, actually, I didn't do that, you should do that? Or do you kind of BS and go down that route where you just make a bunch of stuff up? So definitely, absolutely avoid that. Just be incredibly honest about what you know and what you don't know, but also expect that from your interviewer as well. Like, ask them questions about what it's like working at that company, and get a feel for whether those answers are correct or not, or whether you think that person is lying, right? Like, there's a lot of talk around kind of work-life balance and everything else in this industry, because, you know, this industry has been a little typical for crunch time and everything else. It's like, you know, ask questions around that and get a feel for whether people are being honest to you as well, right? Like, it works both ways.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And then, so Jonathan, you help artists connect with game studios that need work. So we talked a little bit about this over email and stuff, but what are you looking for from profiles of artists, and how important is a portfolio? Matt talked a little bit about it, and you have some thoughts as well, I think, right?
Yeah, I think for me, it's quite fundamental, because before you even get to the portfolio, like what Matt was saying, you have to show passion and energy towards the games industry and something that you want to work on. So my question is, first of all, how do you even get to a level of having relevant portfolio, right? Because two pieces is, I agree with Matt, it's far better than having hundreds of things. And to get to that, there's a few things that quite a few people I know have done to break into the games industry, which is to go and team up with other people and go on itch.io, that's really good, or ModDB, or various other places, to a Discord as well, and say, if you're building out some work, let's build this out together and let's show how we can communicate and how we can work together. We've seen artists who are absolutely phenomenal portfolio, but I think the interpersonal skills we were just talking about are far more important. If you can do things really well, specific things really well, while listening to Matt, right? Matt's the director, he's going to tell you So if you're not able to listen, you're not able to work as a team, which is what games is about, really, then that's going to be really difficult. So people do. I actually like when you show portfolio and say, I actually only worked on these bits, and actually work together to make this a reality. And the best thing I'm seeing now with portfolio and getting people in, if we talk portfolio, it's incredibly important, is the end-to-end journey of saying, well, I don't just make amazing stuff, but I actually know how it gets into a game. I know it. I maybe don't know the full technicalities of it, but I can show that what I've done works. And so, an artist who can produce an amazing character, for example, but has no idea how to hand off to a rigger, really challenging, because then you've made the topology, it doesn't work, and you've not shown that conscientious flow from you to someone else. And so that's really key right now. And the other thing I'm seeing is hyper specialism. So me and Matt were just talking, been in the industry for years and years. Now more than ever, it's hyper specialist is what we're seeing. If you could be a hair groom artist, right, and do hair groom, be absolutely amazing at that and know the ins and outs of that thing. You don't need much portfolio around it, but if you're very specific and you show you can do hair cards and you can do other great technical things around that, then you're a million times more likely to be picked up, because someone's going to say, right, you know what we don't have in our studio right now. And I'm talking sort of mids here, mid to senior. I'll just throw out a bit of a metric that's happening here in the UK, which is a bit of a scary metric, so bear with me. Only 7% of the job roles that are out are for juniors, right? So most of the job roles, and this is 2,000 job roles in the UK each month. So good news, massive market, huge demand. You want to get into the games industry? We need thousands of people. That's not going to change. There's 300,000 new jobs every year in the games industry, right? So this is quite a cyclical thing. There's a lot of work, but with AI, we won't go there necessarily, but with other things happening, it means junior role, you really need a specialism. You need to show that you can hit the sort of mid-level, you can get there. Fewer studios I think Bad Robot might be different. Larger studios are quite good at nurturing and getting people in, but the smaller studios, unfortunately, it's pretty tight, and they need a team who can hit the ground running. So there's amazing things. Actually, it's the equivalent to, let's say, getting into finance. You might start in one of the big four. So you might start in one of the big companies who can train you up, but then you can show all those skills and go off and work for smaller studios as well. So it's sort of at that middle ground, quite challenging. But so it's a huge gambit, different things. Portfolio is extremely important, but and absolutely amazing pieces of portfolio. But if you can show that that's also collaborative in nature, and that's brilliant. That helps such a massive amount. And it's knowing what to build. And I think that's an experimentation early on to see what you like to do. So like Matt's saying, lighting, some people look dev as well in various other roles now. There's so many specialisms you can do. It's good to experiment. I think the best way to do that is probably to work with early days with friends, learn some courses, CGMA and other places, amazing for helping. And then throw stuff out there, see what you enjoy and what you're good at. Be a technical artist though, maybe. I don't know, that's an immediate job, to be honest.
Nice.
Finding good technical artists, oh my God, right? That is big area right now. So if you like that sort of thing, good news. It's good news.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on anything that he said, Matt? I know Bad Robot was recently hiring, or it might even still be hiring for a lot of roles. So,
yeah, I mean, I think Jonathan's really hit it on the head there. I will add, like, vegetation and Houdini artists. Those are two that are in massive demand right now. And I think, like, one of the things I think that Jonathan hit on is key, right? Like games are made by a lot of people, right? Like even in a small studio, even in an indie studio, you're going to have more than 5. You're going to have somewhere between 5 and 500 people working on a game internally. You might then be dealing with outsourcers where you start building up to thousands of people working on a game, depending on what title you're working on, right? So the biggest thing really is how you work with other people, right? Like have that portfolio together, like John said, like show that this is made by many people because it is, right? And most of your interview that you have is not going to be about talking about your portfolio. It might seem like that. People might be asking you questions about your portfolio. They're really trying to understand how you work with other people and how you're going to fit into that team. So, excuse me, it's super, super key that, you know, you're a good team player, whatever that term means, but that, you know, you just get on well with other people, that you treat them with respect, and that you're happy to kind of pick up a bunch of different stuff and run with it and try things out and everything else, right? So a lot of it is really about those interpersonal skills. And I will anytime hire a pretty talented person that is just really great to get along with versus somebody that's like an 11 out of 10, but a complete and utter prima donna and a total nightmare to work with. And like, there's a very limited room for those people working in teams.
Yeah, it's not your work as well, right? When you're working in a game, there's one thing working on your own passion projects and the things you like to do, but you're going to have an art director.
Yep.
You know, you've got to get used to that piece, which is, you know, especially as you're getting in, if you're mid-level, you know, like Matt's going to give you a lot of direction, and you've got to be able to take that direction well, and not necessarily, of course, be passionate about what you're doing and bring your craft to bear. But if it doesn't fit that art style, if it doesn't fit the brief, if it's technically not where it needs to be for the game to work, then you know, you've got to learn pretty fast that you got to work with others and make that a reality. So if you are a prima donna, yeah, I mean, that's no, look, I know how this is done, so that you can't tell me like this is exactly how I'm going to do it. That could be really difficult to work with, you know, and so yeah, I'd sort of add to that. And I think just coming back to the portfolio, if you can show whip, it's very rare for some reason. There's a lot of beauty passes. I think love ArtStation, love everything those guys are doing. Free ArtStation CG Choice and all of that kind of stuff on CG Society, all amazing, but it's sort of driven towards not having a CV, a resume type portfolio. It's driven towards beauty passes and having something that gets a lot of likes and a lot of sort of comments like, whoa, this looks really cool. But actually show the inner workings and show, you know, if you're doing shaders, for example, you can't just take a really good render. That's not enough, like anymore. It used to be, but now you've got to show video content. You've got to show in engine it working, you know, rotation, do a 360, show how the shaders interact, for example, with the lighting. Various things like that are going to give a lot more information to the person reviewing your portfolio. So just a little bit of extra out there. So go the extra mile. And actually what Matt was saying, if you pick two pieces, you can go a lot deeper rather than just absolute scattershot. I'm just going to do a couple of beauty passes of 10 portfolio items. Pick one you love. Really show what you put into that and do all the stuff around it. You know, and actually that helps towards the problem Matt's saying where, well, what did you work on? You know, where you can show a breakout of that particular asset, for example, and do a really nice shot of that. This is what I did. That's in the end scene, but this is what I did. That could be cool as well. I don't see that much, but when I do, I'm like, this is good. This is good because you're not hiding it, actually. You're putting it all the way out there and showing your thought process and everything else, which is really great to see. Just want to see inside your brain a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that it's very important because I remember Matt mentioned before in the past, a lot of the time the hiring team isn't going to be all artists. So being able to show and articulate your process from start to finish is a way that you can communicate to people like perhaps engineers or producers or people who might not be as familiar with the art process, that, hey, this is how I work. This is from beginning to end, you know, the whole picture. Okay, cool. I like that. I'll move on to my next question. So a lot of people in our audience are artists, and just people that we talk to are students, and they're just starting out in the industry. So when thinking about resumes, LinkedIn, work history, how important is experience in the industry when evaluating your candidates, and how best can our less experienced candidates position themselves in an interview? So I'll just start with Matt, and then Jonathan, you can kind of riff off that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, experience really varies depending on what role you're posting for, right? Like if I'm posting for a principal artist to join my team, right? If you only have 2 months experience, that's not you, right? So really, like, experience is just dependent on the role, right? If I'm looking for an associate or a junior artist fresh out of college, that's completely fine, right? Like, so your experience is just what you have, right? Like, you can't make up that experience, right? So it's really just depending on what the role is that you're applying for, and just, you know, try and gauge that, right?
Absolutely. Do you have anything to add to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think the number of years, I think there's a bit of a movement of trying to come away from that. Like, we need to see that you've done a AAA title and you've worked for 3 to 5 years. That was a big thing because you're trying to de-risk it for the studio. So the hiring managers are making sure that they don't make a bad hire, because a bad hire is very expensive, like extraordinarily expensive. And to the producers, art directors and other people, it's even more of a headache, because if you're building out a team in order to deliver that game on for a certain deadline and everything else, you don't want any hiccups, really. You want to make sure it goes as well as it can do. So I think that's the movement away from, having people who, I guess this is the junior challenge that the industry's always seen. But what I'll say is, having 5 years of experience, and this is where I push back on hiring managers, is not the same as having 5 years of learning and growing. So you could be stagnant doing the same thing for 5 years and become very irrelevant in the games industry very quickly. So over 5 years, the techniques have changed. You know, PBR texturing has come about, and there's standards now, and there's ways of doing things, and good workflow and good practice has become paramount to a lot of this stuff. Like, you can't be as messy as it used to be. It's good. It's getting better. Working with certain engines. Now we've got Unreal Engine and Unity. We've got used to be 100 different engines and various things. So if you can show 5 years of learning and growing, and what I mean by that is, you might not have had 5 years in the industry, but you've actually spent a lot of time putting into new techniques and skills over time. In fact, one year of learning and growing can beat out 5 years of industry experience, hands down. If you know the latest and greatest ways of doing things, and you can save that studio a ton of time, right? That's going to be massive, massive, massive for them. So I know a lot of the artists that I've worked with, and friends as well in the industry, the ones that have done extraordinarily well are those that have come in and almost consulted in some way and said, well, I've actually gone away and learned all these new techniques that allow us to do this faster and better. So actually, I'm now leveling up your own team. You know, I'm actually helping other team members because in a studio, you sat next to each other and you're like, okay, right, well, have you tried that actually? Because that might speed things up. So I think it's demonstrating that as to what you know. The last AAA game, brilliant. It de-risks it because but why? It's not your portfolio. It's that you were able to stick around for that time and actually deliver a title.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Not so much that, right? So okay, well, someone actually thought you were good enough to stick around and get along with, and you've got good references. But I come back to the main point. The great thing about the industry at the moment, crazy demand. And the industry is going through a maturity phase now, which it wasn't before. Film and TV's already been through that, where it uses a lot of resources and things like that. Now it's getting harder for studios to find all the talent they need in one place. So there's opportunities now for more people as well to come into the industry to do specialist roles that also are lower risk for the studio. So if you're doing hair groom, for example, yes, you've got to do that well, but you'll be part of a team of more people as well. So the risks are a little bit lower, and it means that they don't have to hire so cautiously, and they can take a chance on you. But if they're taking a chance, they need to know that you've got passion, you've got energy, and you've got technique and things that you're learning, and showing that hope and that glimmer of that you care about your craft. I think that's so important. If you take the converse thing, you just turn up and say, I think it'd be really cool if I was in the games industry. No, like, what's that biggest question?
Yeah.
Why do you want to be in this particular industry? Because it is hard. It's games, but and it's media and entertainment space. But to be honest, it's harder than a lot of other jobs, and people don't give it credit for that because they go, "That's cool because it's in games." It is tough. It's a lot of work. You got to be very savvy and a great creator of things, which I don't think people always take credit for. But anyway, it's hard. So if you're really, really, really brand new, that's why I say go work with a sort of a team and see what you like, see if you want to get into it, and not for the. I did computer animation as well at university, and of course, there's loads of people that join the course and things like that because they think it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
Those people didn't make it, so they just dropped out at some point because it's not the I'm going to make some amazing animations for Disney type thing. They actually realize this is hard. But Matt, there's probably a question. Sorry, I'm asking a question this back here because I don't know how this is now. But
No, I love it.
education. How much does education play a part now on what you see?
I got to be careful here. I have a 16-year-old son, so my answer to this group might be different to him. But like, education to me is almost like that first job, and it's like you mentioned, like having that like one AAA experience under your belt is often about just like sticking through the development process, right? It's like, hey, this person can stick at something, right? And the same goes with education, right? Like you're looking at university, you're 18 years old, you don't quite know what you want to do. A lot of people need support around them. They need instructors, they need tutors, they need other students around them to push them and to keep them going, right? And I'll say for those people, education is key. Or maybe like it's kind of expensive, like buying a computer is expensive, and thankfully like Blender and Unreal and everything is free, so you can get, there's not so much software you have to buy anymore, but maybe you can't afford that, right? Like maybe you've got a grant to go to a university and study this. So, there's many reasons why education is good. I'll also say that the time is so different to when I learned 3D, God knows how many years ago, right? Like there's the internet now, there's so many amazing YouTube channels, there's Udemy, there's so many great places where if you're motivated, you can pick things up and just run with it by yourself, right? Like I'm going to go off topic a bit, but my son, he's 16. At the start of COVID, he decided he was going to start coding, right? And he loved kind of making little games, and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to start coding. And he followed a bunch of tutorials on YouTube. This last year, he's picked up C++ and is like doing a bunch of Udemy courses, right? And he's so incredibly driven that to get a job in the industry, he wouldn't have to go to university, right? Like he's in his free time, he's sitting there coding, and we have to be like, yo, shouldn't you go play with your friends, right? Like,
Yeah.
but that's him, and it's like it's so different for other people. And really, like, ask yourself, do I need a group of people around me to push me forward, right? And I'll talk to quite a lot of high schoolers that want to get into the industry because they sit there and they play video games and they're like, hey, I could get paid for working on this. That would be amazing. And I talk to them, I'm like, yeah, well, so what do you do at the weekends? They're like, oh yeah, I go hang out with my buddies and then play Call of Duty and everything else. I'm like, how would you feel about not doing that and spending your weekends learning your craft, and maybe not seeing your friends for 6 months as much, right? And they're like, oh, I thought I could just get hired because I like games and then I'll learn on the job. And it's like, that's not how this industry works, right? Like, there's a lot of evenings where you don't see your friends. There's a lot of weekends where you don't see your friends. And that's purely because the only way to get good in this industry is by repetition and just by doing something over and over and over again. Nobody nails it first time. Even the principal artists that are amazing at stuff, like, they screw up all the time, and it's all about making little mistakes and correcting yourself and just keeping learning from that, right? So at the beginning, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. It's going to take a lot to learn all of the processes and everything else, because this is so much more complex than it was 20 years ago, right? Like, 20 years ago, you made a cube and you put a rock texture on it, and you got yourself a rock. Like, big deal, right? That's not. We're much closer to a film production pipeline now than we ever used to be. So, there needs to be that dedication. And if you need education, if you need somebody, a tutor or a lecturer pointing at you saying you've got to have this done by this date for you to actually do it, then go do it, right? But if you also the kind of person where you can say, okay, I'm gonna have a job where I work a few days a week to pay the bills, and then my other days I'm just gonna sit at my computer and learn this stuff. That's fantastic too. And I'd say, if you are going to do that in both regards, get on Discord, get on whatever chat channel you have, and post your work on there, get feedback from other people. That's hugely important. And like Jonathan was saying, maybe find a group of people that you can work on a project together with, right? And that will really help push you forward as well, not just in the skills on how you use Substance Painter or whatever you want to use, but how you work together as a team, how you deal with engineers and different personalities and all of the different roles in the games industry.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll do just one more question, and then I'll move on to some of our audience questions. We got a bunch of them, so happy to see that. So I think one of the big things that is kind of common in the audience questions is, it seems to be like, how can artists differentiate themselves from other competitors? It's such a competitive industry. And what are some unique approaches that you guys have seen that makes them really stand out and stuff? We talked a bit about portfolios and different ways to do that, but are there any other things that, just to get that initial interview and get their foot in the door, get noticed, And we'll start with Matt.
I think there's a variety of ways to get somebody to review your application, and it doesn't always involve bribing them with a PayPal check.
Yeah.
There's one of the things that I love is that on ArtStation or something, you'll see somebody's piece of work, and even now, like, I'll look at it, I'm like, that's really cool. I wonder what process they used for doing this kind of stylized process or whatever they're doing. And then a week later, they'll post, hey, this is how I did it. And they'll give a great, blog review of like, oh, I did all of these processes. And I love to see that, right? Like, I love to see somebody wanting to educate other people. So they're not getting anything out of it, right? But they want to share that knowledge. And I think that always stands a candidate out to me, because I hate an art team where they all hide their little nugget of knowledge and they hold on to it because they think this is the one thing that's going to keep them at a studio, when it's the total opposite. Like, the people that always excel, and I think, Jonathan, you mentioned this, the people that always excel are the people that will take the whole team, push the whole team forward, and share knowledge and share processes and everything else. So if you can do that, that's fantastic. Like, do do an ArtStation thing, do an 80 level posts, post on Discord and help people out and get a name for yourself doing that. I think that is a really, really great way to differentiate yourself. And it shows that you really want to support people and help a group of people learn.
Awesome. And Jonathan, it looked like you had something to say.
Oh, there's loads of things you can do, and the beauty is now I think there was a middle piece where it's quite hard to stand out because there's a lot of generalists in the industry, and you're fighting to do the same jobs as a lot of other people. So there's a lot of specialist roles now. I've spoken about that, but I'd just add to this by saying the types of requests we get are hyper specific now. Like they're looking for very specific style and a very specific, sort of outcome from people, because games have to stand out, right? The games you're building have to be unique as well. So they're looking for that unique style that's going to help their studio build something that nobody else can do, and that could be very stylistic. I mean, look at Fortnite, hyper stylistic, but they've carved out a style now that is Fortnite. Like you just know it.
Yeah.
You see assets and you're like, oh, that's Fortnite. So the games are under a lot of pressure to stand out like that. And when people are looking for those types of artists, their portfolio, and it does come back to portfolio and visuals, are the first jump off point. You say, okay, well, that's interesting. I've not seen anything like that. Now this could be if you want to do something like PUBG, you want to get into like hyper realistic first person shooter simulation style, then go hyper realistic. Like literally you're studying your reference and you are building out. If you're a weapons artist, you're going to be doing like details that nobody else would normally spot, because the inner mechanics of weaponry and things like that, and you're just really into that. I mean, that's how you get a job at like World of Tanks, so those guys. Like you've got to really know your stuff on that side, and it's very different from sort of an RTS style game that's very different in terms of its approach and dynamics, and then you're looking at volume as well, so you can show the variation of assets, but lots of assets. So there's a lot of things like that. So get specific. Ideally, if you really want to press in studio, you're going to build something in their DNA, right? And you're going to be like, I've built this, and why I've done this is I really love what you do, and I love the style of what you've done. I've replicated it. For me, I've got my own take on it, but this is something that can plug and play for your studio tomorrow. And I've got your DNA somehow, like in the mix. It's hard to do, but this has been coming for a while. They're like World of Warcraft, right? And the Blizzard style. Like if you wanted to get in, you're not going to win a job doing that if you're doing FPS, like I say. So that would help. But then, yeah, what Matt is saying as well, all the detail that went into that, the thought process, show the mood boards, show that you've taken some direction from somewhere, show where that genesis of that thing was. And if you really want to make a name for yourself in order to get in, share everywhere. Like, don't be shy, put it out there. I struggled to get in the industry, but I was really bad at sharing. A bit of a perfectionist. I was never happy with the work I was doing, and I'm more of a technical mind anyway with my approach to things, and so artistically wasn't as good. But I could have showed, well, how did I do some procedural tech? This is way back pre-PBR and all that sort of stuff. But how was I doing the procedural work and all of that type of stuff? Showing, well, now it's nodes and everything else, but show your node graph, show what's gone into it. Then you get hired as in that specific role because you've shown thought and process behind it. So how do you show, the other thing that's happening in the industry that's going to be good for people is certification. It's coming, right? We've needed this for a long time, but Unity now have the certified trainers as well as Unreal. So you can do certified courses and actually get a rubber stamp and something that says, I've passed this particular course. And academies are springing up as well. So there's Warner Brothers Academy, where for those who want to stick it out and want to get really industry specific, they look for people who are really passionate and show that, that spark and that energy. And it's coming away from traditional. I think universities have struggled because they can't keep up, but industry training that happens from the big guys is actually brilliant what they're doing. Ubisoft have theirs, Warner Brothers have theirs. So look for that because they've got them out there. So and then you get that certification as well. You've shown you've stuck it out. But there's so much happening in the space. It's going to make it a bit easier for people. A lot easier, actually. I hope anyway.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, well, we got about 10 minutes left before the hour, so I just want to do some audience questions. There's some pretty decent ones in here, I think. So one person asked, what suggestions would you have for artists who have spent their professional careers so far working in other creative industries and are now looking to make the transition into the game industry? It can feel like starting over from scratch despite having 10 years professional art experience, and it can be difficult to know where to focus learning for necessary skills and software when deciding what roles to pursue. I thought that was a pretty good question.
That's a great question. I mean, I think the answer kind of varies depending on what role they had to what role they're going into. And I'd say like, my advice is relatively similar to my advice to someone that's just wanting to get into the industry. It's like find that niche that you really enjoy, right? And there's this cyclical thing of the industry goes through like needing certain professions in certain years and everything else. Like on the environment side, like vegetation artists are huge at the moment. Like finding a good vegetation artist is bloody impossible because they're all snapped up. And the same with kind of procedural tech and everything else, right? But like find that one thing that you're interested in, research it on how to do it, and just start doing it, right? So you've come from a advertising, graphic design background where you've been making signs for Whole Foods, let's say, right? And you've decided you want to get into the games industry. That's great that you've made all the graphic design. Like clearly you've got artistic skill there, but you've now got to show that you can apply it to games. So start learning the software and the tools and the process that you need to actually kind of start doing that one thing that you want to do, and play some games, right? And it's like, play some games, look at the game and think, hey, it'd be kind of fun to know how to animate, right? Or it'd be kind of fun to make a character, or these environments are really cool. Like I love the storytelling here. So like start looking at how to be a world builder, like find that one thing that you're really interested in doing, and then get on forums and ask about how this stuff is done. Like you're starting from ground zero, just ask a ton of questions.
Absolutely. Another question we had is, how important is the cover letter? What exactly do recruiters want to see in the cover letter? And do you have any tips to make your cover letter stand out or, be good?
The new cover letter is your ArtStation profile or your, right? That's the new cover letter. I don't think people are going to a lot of depth on the textual stuff that you've written there. It's not like other roles necessarily in that regard. I think it's immediately going to your profile, who you are. That's more important than saying, well, actually, when you get to get past the sort of the guard, it's obviously important to say how passionate you are. But I think if you wanted to get the foot in the door, it would be better to say, I've built this thing in the standard that you guys make, and I'd love for you to take a look, critique it, let me know what you think. And I'm just super passionate about what you guys do. I know there's a lot of people hired off of fan art. There's a lot of fan art around cyberpunk and things like that, actually taking that style and those people go on to work at those studios. That's your cover letter. That's your, that's your, I'm passionate about what you guys do, and I want to get into that. I just think gone are the days of the specific detail cover letters, maybe. But maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen that in a while, actually. People don't really ask me for people's cover letters in that way. They just want to get right to the meat of it, I guess.
Can you speak to that at all, Matt?
Yeah, so like, I think Bad Robot, we still ask for a cover letter if you want to put one in. If you are going to do a cover letter, do not do something generic or written by ChatGPT, because you can spot it a mile off. Like I've had a cover letter that came in, not at Bad Robot, it was at a previous studio, where they clearly downloaded like a generic cover letter, and they'd actually put, like, in the little block where you're meant to put the company name that you're looking forward to working for, they hadn't put the company name there. There was just brackets, insert company name, and it's like, sorry, like, that's just like, it's all about, is this person going to make an effort to make our product better? And that starts with literally everything that you do, right? And that includes the cover letter. So if you're going to write a cover letter, really research the company that you're looking at. And you should do that anyway. Like, you should be wanting to work there because of X, Y, and Z, right? And so really research that company and show that in the cover letter, like, this is why I want to work for you. And to Jonathan's point, like, your ArtStation really is your cover letter, right? Like that is kind of everything. And whilst there's definitely some problems with ArtStation, like, everybody uses it for showing off their art. So, I think what you said, Jonathan, about the doing fan art or showing that you can do something in the style of one studio, if you're really set on one studio, I think that's great.
All right, thank you. I think we probably have time for just one more question. This one, I'm going to kind of like reword it a little bit, but say a candidate is transitioning from a studio and their work was all under an NDA. Like, how do they talk about that work in an interview process? And do you guys have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's tough. That's happening a lot at the moment as well. I think that's changing as well. Once the game is released, now I'm not a lawyer, so please don't take this as it is, right? But on the release of a title, it's now in the public domain. You cannot talk about things that you're working on that haven't been released yet, likely. That's normally the case. It's very rare a studio wants to share that for good reason. They want to market and release things at the moment in time and capture, and do that. So I think the best thing you can do is go speak with the studio, let them know what you want to do, and say, and most studios are brilliant. Like the industry is so small, they're not going to say, no, I don't think so, mate. Like, I'm going to stop you from getting the next job. We know it's cyclical. You might end up back at the same shit. Nobody wants to burn bridges. So it's more, this is what I want to showcase. Is this covered? Am I okay to release this? Am I okay to say that I've done this and worked on this? But you'll notice this is a blast on LinkedIn that happens every time a film gets released or a game. Suddenly, that day, LinkedIn is, I'm in the credits and here's what I worked on, and like the portfolios start coming out. And I love that day, because then it's like, wow, I can see what you did, and that's brilliant. But most of the time, you're not going to be you don't want to transition in the middle of a project, right? Don't do that. Like, if you can, sure, if the culture's not right for you and something's gone wrong. But so really, if you're looking to transition to work for another studio and something else, you're probably at a good transitionary point anyway, where you can share that work, not halfway through in some of the stuff you've worked on. This is hard though. I don't know, Matt, what your thoughts are. Really tough, actually, that one. It
is really tough. Like, I will say, like, always respect the NDA. But if you are, I haven't worked for a studio yet that somebody's gone to their lead or their director and said, hey, I'm moving on. I need to be able to show something. What can I show? Right. And then, you know, normally that has to go through a few people, and there'll be a lot of talk around, okay, but you've got to put it behind a passworded website. And if any of this stuff gets out, then you're in a bit of serious trouble there, pal, right? Like normally a studio will do you a favor and let you show a couple of pieces behind a, you know, a locked door. And, you know, I think that's good enough, but always respect the NDA. Don't go to a studio with a portfolio and say, hey, like, here's all of my work for the next X-Men or whatever it is. It's like, look at all these crazy cool scenes that I worked on. And you'd be like, should you be showing this? Because
Yeah.
my initial thing is, if you come and work for me, you're probably going to do that with all of the content.
Yeah.
From
Good point. Yeah.
Risk a release of all of the stuff that we've been doing. It's like, I can't risk that, but I know that you've got to show something. It is very difficult. I think it's also key, if you are in the position where you can do personal work, then do some personal work that you can show as well. And it doesn't have to be a huge, massive scene, like just spend a weekend sculpting something or building a cool shader in Unreal. So it's something that you could show us that will back up that you've got all of this experience, and it doesn't have to be something massive.
All right. Well, that's our time. I just want to thank you guys so much for being here. You guys had some really insightful answers. I think our listeners got a lot out of this. So I really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
And then just to anybody who's still around, I hope that if you can, you go to mudstack.com, sign up for free today. We're regularly making content like this that's always going to be free and accessible for you. We really care about artists and we want to help artists succeed. So thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.